So, Eric Hansen.
President and Kevin Forsyth.
Zach Bolt.
Present.
Chris Arnold called in, is not well today. Brian Larson. Here. Tanya Kuntz might call in. Craig Wald.
Here.
Dave Zavero. Here. Kyle Kwame.
Here.
Andrew Butke.
Here.
John Zavero.
Here.
Josh Brown. That's who we have in the room, Tim, and we can see your screen.
Okay, good. There we go. Slideshow. All right. Well, thank you all for being here for one more meeting today and for your participation and feedback and information sharing back and forth during the study. And also, I know some of you weren't able to make the in-person open house last month, which was also great. So I missed some of the introductions. Hannah Johnson is also on the line from Alliance, and Hannah did a lot of work on the open house as well, and so can chime in with answers to questions or responses to some of the comments. So yeah, the agenda is really mostly that, to review the open house and then also talk about our draft study report, and then make sure to get any feedback that you all have, input, questions. As you know, we are wrapping up the study this month at the end of the month, which is coming up in about 2 weeks. And so the schedule I've been showing the whole time is mostly behind us now. Just say here we are in January and we're at the end. The slide with our deliverables, same thing. Most of them have moved to the left-hand column. So in progress is really this meeting and finishing up the report. So to dive into the open house and public engagement in general, before we do that, I wanted to show this slide looking back on what we've done for the study. And as you know, we were very much oriented toward online engagement due to COVID primarily. But what we see here is, I think, really successful report. If you're used to looking at some of these statistics, this is for the project-specific website that we set up last March, the social pinpoint site. Total visits is just number of visits, not necessarily unique people, which is why we have the second line there for unique users, which is tracked by, IP sort of device addresses. So close to 4,000 unique users, and then you get to that 15,000 because of multiple visits. But I think 4,000 is a really nice number. Obviously, compared to the population, it's not a huge number, but compared to what we often see trying to involve people in studies like this, it's really, I feel like we did accomplish that goal of getting pretty broad involvement. And so, as I'm sure you may have already heard on this study, and we always hear people say, I didn't know about it, I wasn't involved. It's difficult, but I think we did a good job, and certainly you all had a role in spreading the word as well. The other items aren't quite as big numbers, but we did sort of generate more addresses or people to just be on the email list for the project and for future MPO projects, which is great. And as you know, we have been transparent in sharing all our documents along the way, and despite their technical nature, we got plenty of people downloading those as well. As you know, these meetings have all been live streamed and also posted, so that is a different set of numbers that I don't have access to, but I know the meetings have been viewed many times. Earl, I can't remember if you have any of those numbers off the top of your head.
Just some of the first meetings were live streamed. We were having over 1,000 views on each of the city's individual websites, so I don't have the latest views.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so I just wanted to be aware of that in summary. Moving on to the open house in particular, open house number 2 for the project last month. Purpose really to share our evaluation results, looking at the 3 options, 3 including the no build or the no new bridge option. And then also, as you saw sharing an illustration of what a new bridge could look like at either of these locations. And then that third bullet there, knowing that the questions about pedestrian safety and traffic calming were sort of a theme throughout the study, we did try to share some information about how that would work going forward. The process here, the usual advertising to get the word out, and then, as you know, the open house was online for 3 weeks, included information there both to look at and to sort of watch and listen to in terms of the video presentation. And then a survey, which we'll talk about the results of the survey here. And then the in-person event, one evening there on December 16th at East Grand Forks City Hall with information and sort of the 2 rooms, including the consultant team, unfortunately not live, but due to weather for us to get up there, but available, and we did. Hannah and Mike Conzioka were there to field a number of questions. So again, looking at some numbers in terms of results. Relatively low attendance in person, again, not totally unusual. I would like to see more. Obviously, mid-December is a busy time for people, and it's winter. We did, however, get good online participation. You see that total visits of 6,000 and then the unique users of about 1,800. So that, if you remember the unique users for the whole project, that's almost half came around this event. So people really did engage with it. And then in terms of information sort of back to us, we do have survey responses from both in person and then a good number from online. So some summary information from in person. I know some of you were there. Feel free to chime in with your own summary. But certainly questions, wanting to understand the traffic numbers. That was a lot of the information that we presented, or was the basis for a lot of those evaluation criteria for our traffic modeling, forecasting, and traffic operations analysis. Certainly a theme, not for the first time, but why aren't we studying a bridge farther south, say 47th or Merrifield? That's, I think, there's obviously no needs for multiple bridges, and then it's easy to imagine that the answer is somewhere farther away outside your neighborhood. Couple little discussion on economic development at the in-person event, sort of what is the benefit of the new bridge, and whether sort of how the benefits from between Grand Forks and East Grand Forks were taken into account, which, as you may recall, that was really a high level from us. We did not do an economic analysis, but rather assume that increased mobility and accessibility is a positive on both sides of the river. And that's certainly theme, as we've seen all along, from 32nd Avenue neighborhoods, concerns about increased traffic, school crossing safety and traffic flow in particular, and then traffic on residential streets and driveway in and out, and that type of, again, sort of traffic flow concerns. How will this work in front of my house or property in my neighborhood? Coming up on the next slide, we'll sort of go into the summary of the online comments. And, the slides to come is everything combined, but really, almost all of the comments, given the numbers, were from the online participation. So we asked just a handful of questions. The first one was, how well do you feel each alternative meets the project purpose and need? And as I said at the TAC meeting last week, it was a little bit of a trick question. That's not quite the right word, but technically, the purpose and need is what we use to sort of develop the alternatives. And so the evaluation criteria gives the technical answer for how well they meet the purpose and need. But we just wanted to ask Bill, what do you think? What's your interpretation of sort of the needs and how well we address them? So you see these three sets of bars in the graph. The first one is for no new bridge, And you see that big tall maroon bar means the no new bridge does not meet the purpose and need, which makes sense because the purpose was to address traffic by building a new bridge. The next two sets of bars are for Elks Drive and 32nd Avenue respectively. What you see for Elks Drive is that tallest bar still doesn't meet the purpose and need very well. But we do see more of a mixture in responses between the gray bar, which is a neutral, and the light blue, which is it meets the purpose and need well, and the dark blue, which is very well. And the last set is for 32nd Avenue. You do see the tallest one there is the dark blue, meaning that people who responded indicated it does meet. It was like 62% of respondents. 32nd Avenue does meet the purpose and need very well. But notice there's a large number, the second largest number indicated it does not meet the purpose and need very well. So on one hand, these are our opinions as opposed to analyzing the data. And as always, as you know, when we have an event or we send out a survey, it's biased by the people who choose to respond as opposed to those people who don't. That said, several hundred responses here is helpful information. So I think this is useful, and I guess to me wasn't necessarily a surprise in that there is interest in 32nd Avenue and leaning toward it, but not universal by any means. And plenty of people that are either don't like any of the options or don't feel a new bridge in this area is the right answer. Question number 2, trying to sort of take people with concerns and channel that into something constructive. So what would you change, if anything, to improve the performance of each bridge option? We did not get a lot of responses. It was the type of question that you had to think about, but I think the ones we did get were useful. So for Elks Drive, 24 people wrote us something about an improvement, and the themes that came out there were really around the local streets, improved traffic control at intersections, suggestions for a signal or a roundabout. Handful of comments felt that the elevation of the bridge overall should be increased. And then modifying the Grand Forks approach, again, a couple of comments which relates to sort of where or how it would land on the Grand Forks side. 32nd Avenue, we got a few more responses, 37, and some similar themes, as you can see, but certainly that consistent attention around pedestrian safety and school safety, in addition to sort of traffic control at intersections in general. Third question is the straight-up question of which alternative do you prefer? Sort of mirrors that first question in a way. We saw 56% with 32nd Avenue, but then the second highest number was 27% for no new bridge at all, and then 17% for Elks Drive. Fourth question was just an open-ended to sort of fish around and see what else people had to tell us, and so we got about 160 written responses, and then the bullets here on the slide pull out the themes. And those responses, I should say, are cataloged in a spreadsheet if anybody wants to see those. So you can see these themes here with the bullets and a number in parentheses after to indicate the number of times that theme came up. So not surprisingly, the first one, concerns about increased traffic in neighborhoods and around schools. And then some questioning just sort of related to that. What is the benefit of this bridge to Grand Forks? Second item, desire for a bridge farther south, as I mentioned before. And then balanced against the third item, which was enthusiasm about a new bridge, new connection across the river. I think often you see that comment as in, why haven't you done this already? Build it today, let's get on with it. Good questions about funding. Where will the money come from, and to what extent will the cities have to pay for it, and then sort of how much for each city. questions we don't have precise answers to at this point. Flooding, not surprisingly, still, well, both impacts to the flood system. Wanted to make sure there's no adverse impacts there. And then I think some questions about should the bridge be higher. As you know, the medium elevation bridge still has some small percent of flood impact as opposed to the high elevation. I think we've seen the adverse impacts of the high elevation bridge are probably not desired, certainly not in these locations. Finally, concerns about impacts to the greenway. And I should mention that we're aware of at least a couple efforts by individuals or groups to get the word out, which we appreciate. One of those was Safe Kids Grand Forks, focused around school safety. So I think that certainly brought in some additional comments on that theme. And then the Greenway organization also had a nice article that they shared with their membership list. This next slide is just kind of a fun thing we like to do, a word cloud. If you take all those survey responses, what are the most, the biggest word on the page is the most common. So bridge, not surprisingly, and maybe not that helpful. But if you look beyond that, you know, traffic is the one that comes up after that. So I think that's helpful to see and not surprising. And if you look a little bit beyond that, you certainly see schools coming up. Next after that, we see neighborhoods, and other ones. So it's kind of just a fun visual, but also is helpful to just see the information in a different way. Then finally, we did do some demographic questions, which are mostly interesting and also help us see sort of who we're reaching and maybe who we're not reaching. So you can see here on the screen in terms of race and age and gender in the graphs there, and then we also ask questions about language, disability, and public assistance, which are both useful. And then also, as you know, the MPO is, or you may know, MPO is required to include those questions. Finally, we ask how people heard about the event, which helps us know how our efforts have worked. And so you see in the graph specific questions that we asked people. So we see internet was the biggest vote getter, mailing, which was not the MPO, but might have been others, newspaper, and then the last and second tallest bar there is the other item. And so if we see that combined with the advocacy group item, it gives us some information on who was getting the word out. I mentioned Safe Kids Grand Forks, emails, including from the MPO, social media, neighbors, neighborhood group, ad hoc group, and Greenway email and newsletter. So I believe that is it for the open house. I guess I'll pause here to take questions or comments from all of you.
Yeah, this is Dave here. I'm just wondering, how this relates to some of the other traffic studies that have been done for participation with the public. Is this considered to be one that has high traffic or considered low traffic, as in people participating in the feedback?
Good question. Earl?
As you saw with the unique users group, and particularly even on the survey, that we're well beyond the thousands. That's probably 1,000 more people than typical. We're usually in the low 100 as one of our top events, typically. And that goes for even public events on each individual city side. Frequently, a public hearing has quite a number of fewer people involved in the meeting. So the online presence that we had, and plus the support of all of you in the ad hoc group in both cities, with the live streaming, we had considerable participation versus or compared to what we would typically see if it were done mostly in-person events.
Yeah, good question. I guess you all may have your observations too from the last year and a half or 2 years, but I think the sort of online participation is here to stay, and I think it actually has been positive in more people getting used to doing that, and so we're getting more involvement than we were beforehand. That said, there's also no replacement for in-person, so I think we're all imagining continued hybrid approach going forward. Other questions or comments, observations from the open house? Everybody wondering what they're doing at this meeting on MLK Day?
Tim, I think all of the individual comments are included in the appendix of the report that was linked to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Good point. Well, good transition then to the report, which I know you just got recently, and don't expect that you have read it, but we would like you to look at that and provide comments. We shared it with the TAC last week and have provided them till the 26th to get comments, and we'll ask the same for all of you. Most of the material you have seen before, or it has been shared with you before in the form of the technical memos that we've produced. What we did was package those up with an executive summary in the front, public involvement summary to make it clear all the work that we did and feedback that we received. And then you've seen the evaluation results as a presentation, but we did formalize that into a piece of the report as well. So if anyone has looked at it and has questions or comments now, I'd be glad to get into those, but I don't necessarily expect that you have had time to digest it. Any questions or comments on the report? Okay, well, again, look forward to your comments to make sure there's nothing missing. Again, the technical work has been checked, so I'm not expecting there's any issues there, but do appreciate you taking a look at it. Again, in terms of our schedule on the consultant side, we are finished as of the end of the month, and we'll have the report finalized and posted to the project website by the end of the month, so that can be viewed. So that's the last slide. I'd be glad for any other feedback, sort of in terms of the last bit of work that we've done, or certainly also on the project as a whole, or also questions or comments about what's next.
Yeah, what is next?
The next steps would be obviously to finish the report, get it posted. The MPO board will accept the report and then distribute its findings of the report. If you recall, previous to this report, there was a hydraulic study that looked at sites, more sites than this one. The hydraulic study was able to eliminate some sites due to technical reasons, the hydraulic impact. One of the purpose of this study was to see if there were things that would allow us to eliminate the remaining 3 options. And as we went through the study and documented, we didn't find any major failures with any of the 3 options. So this study is not eliminating any of the options from being pursued further. It does evaluate and give you a bit of a scoring and a ranking of the remaining options and what the public feedback was on those options. And so The next steps would then be for both cities and the MPO to continue to work together on trying to fund a bridge that serves the city-to-city traffic. That's, I think you'll see the study documents the need for. There's still a continued effort in addition to this to try to find funding and get both counties to pursue the Merrifield Bridge option as well. I guess the favorable thing in the news, a lot of the reasons why we don't have these additional bridges in the past have been too tight of a funding availability out there, both from a national perspective and from both states' perspective. There's a lot of funds that are in the coffers now and available. On the national level, Congress created 2 new programs specifically for bridges. One is a program that is distributed by a formula, so each state is going to get X number of millions of dollars per year for the next 5 years specifically for bridges. Another program that's for bridges is more of a national competitive one. However, in that one, each state is guaranteed to have funding for at least one mega bridge in the state. A mega bridge defined by a cost of $50 million or more. And that program also, by law, says a state can decide that if they don't want $50 million to go to one bridge, they can have 2 bridges built up to that $50 million mark, or two bridges funded. So even though it's a national competition, there is by law a guarantee that each state is going to get at least one bridge out of that program. And so, again, from a national perspective, there are now funds geared specifically for bridges, more so than there ever has been in the past. Plus, there is millions and billions of dollars more available just for transportation in general from a national perspective. And again, each state, as we see in the recent budget announcements, Minnesota has billions of dollars in reserve, North Dakota has billions of dollars in reserve, and even though North Dakota did distribute out all of their COVID emergency funds, Minnesota still has a considerable amount of theirs yet to go through the legislative process. So North Dakota did spend millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars towards infrastructure. So that means, you know, from a state perspective, other higher needs are being funded. So these needs are now starting to rise up faster because we're funding all the previous identified needs that were higher ranked throughout the state and in both cities. So that's a long-winded answer to the question. The next steps are for continued work between the 2 cities and the MPO and our state and federal partners to try to fund and finance and construct not just this inner-city bridge, but also the Merrifield, the more regional traffic bridge. And it's not I guess, which comes first is which one has the oomph behind it to get things lined up and getting done.
I have a question for you. I'm sorry, I'll let you finish.
I was just going to say, good question, good answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, a question for you, Earl. You know, throughout this process, I guess I was hoping to see the no bridge option kind of fall off. Speaking personally here, and maybe we would carry forward with these 2 options. What was the criteria that we would have had to have hit for that no bridge option to not continue into the final report?
Really, the do nothing or no bridge option is carried through the project development process, so it's very difficult. We're not through the project development process, so it's very difficult to eliminate it at this point.
Serves as a baseline, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Baseline comparison, I guess.
Yep. So what it has done so far is just shown that there are tens of millions of dollars that would need to be spent primarily in the city of Grand Forks for the traffic needs that we're forecasting out into the future by having a bridge either at these two sites. Those tens of millions of dollars are shared most likely equally between both sides of the river to solve the transportation congestion that we're forecasting. And primarily that congestion is occurring on the North Dakota side.
Yeah, just underscore, it's a good question, and maybe it was confusing because of the survey results that showed people's preferences, but if you look back at our evaluation results, again, we do have the no-build option in there for comparison, but you'll see it does not address the problem. So yeah, its purpose is the baseline.
The biggest investment that would be needed so far identified has been the intersection of Demers and Washington. And I think we did inform you that North Dakota DOT was doing a separate study of that intersection. They're trying to see if there were some, I'll lose the phrase, low-hanging fruit to get there's some safety issues there as well. That study is out in a draft form for staff review and comment. It really is not finding a lot of those low-hanging fruits because we've done a lot of individual things through that intersection in the recent past. But it is still identifying the higher cost solutions like now I'm escaping the name of it.
Yeah, I am too. The big intersection.
Continuous flow intersection.
There you go.
CFI, continuous flow intersection, which we had, if you saw in the matrix, the cost for that is upwards of $18 million alone for that intersection. South Washington, from that intersection to about the Burger King area, if you're familiar with the stores, Hammerling would be the technical street, is needing of a complete reconstruction without another bridge, 4 lanes of through traffic with all the driveways and street connections makes it difficult to replace it with the same footprint. And that reconstruction, we got a temporary mill and overlay relief on it, and it was meant to be just a temporary relief to give us another maybe 10 years tops. So that's going to be something that's coming up pretty soon. Again, as on the Grand Forks side is the Demers Washington intersection, not just capacity issues, but there's safety issues at that intersection as well. And then the reconstruction of the segment of South Washington from Demers south to where it divides to a divided 4-lane, which is at about Hammerling or the Burger King area. There is another alternative in that draft report that they haven't priced out, and it is an MCut is the acronym for it. And what happens if you're driving from downtown Grand Forks west, the MCut is a medium U-turn. And so you would go past Washington, and somewhere determined between Washington and 20th, maybe 17th or somewhere along there, is where you would do a median U-turn to head back to Washington and then take a right turn to go down Washington. So that's another alternative from a capacity point of view, has the ability to have a level of service that's acceptable, but it's more in use across the nation, particularly if you're in the Michigan area, Illinois areas. So those are about the two competing alternatives that the draft report is focusing on right now for a longer-term capacity and safety resolution to the intersection.
Those different types of intersections you just talked about, are they used within like major city corridors like that? Are they on heavy highways?
Yes.
Typically on more highway situations?
Yep, the continuous flow intersection, the nearest ones you'll see that I'm aware of are in the Colorado area. Fort Collins has a few of them in that area of Colorado. The MCuts, I'm more familiar with them through my travels in Michigan and haven't really experienced them in Minnesota or elsewhere. There's a lot of kind of similar intersections being introduced. They're called the ARC-cuts, reduced conflict intersections, where they're eliminating the through traffic on side streets across a divided four-lane highway, and then to make that right turn, to make that left turn out, you have to go through a median U-turn or another intersection. You'll see a lot of those now being in Minnesota, but they're more for very minor side street access onto a major highway, not two major roadways in their intersections.
Peter, also to go back to the first part of your answer, I think part of the question was, are those treatments, the CFI or the MCut, typically in an urban setting versus more of a highway setting? And I think the answer would be urban sort of / suburban, because that's where you have this type of sort of overloaded arterial. Is that how you would answer that, Earl?
Yeah. Yes.
So it's not ideal. I mean, I guess if I learned one thing from this study, it's that if you look at the street system, or sort of the traffic loading, especially on the Grand Forks side, it's very much overloaded, in particular at this intersection, as not the only reason, but as traffic funnels toward that single crossing. And having an additional crossing within the city limits to the south pulls part of that traffic off, such that the improvement needed at Demers and Washington is less. That's not to say it's all gone. But definitely we get this overload on a couple of, on Washington and Demers in particular, in part just because everything concentrates up in that sort of north area and heading east.
Yes, and it's the last piece of that draft report that's out is confirming yet again that the intersection of Demers and Washington has the highest volume in the state of North Dakota still. And North Dakota DOT did do a massive counting program in Grand Forks in 2021. And I guess we're starting to see in the preliminary numbers that that traffic that is taking now the Point Bridge and utilizing Belmont to 32nd movements, or Belmont to 13th Avenue, Belmont to 8th Avenue, is higher than it was the last time we counted those corridors. And it's not official counts yet, but the preliminary data I've seen is that it's sort of our model is assuming or forecasting that trend, and then the recent counts seem to be supporting that activity that's taking place.
I think that's a good segue into some of the comments that I had on this in general. What the data has shown me is that either bridge location is going to drastically increase traffic in designed residential areas with tons of driveways, tons of people, and that's not a fact that you can overlook. As soon as you open that bridge, it's not going to be gradual increase over time like you'd see with a no bridge option. It'll be immediate traffic congestion in high residential neighborhoods. And another thing that's been discussed, and I feel it's kind of been glossed over a little bit, and I've talked to a lot of people on the south end of Grand Forks, is the concern of the school. It's a huge issue. We've got over 1,000 kids. There's over 1,000 kids that go to those two schools. Key factor between the ages of 5 and 14. They're elementary and middle-aged school kids who everybody knows may not have the best decision-making capability. And according to Appendix B on the report that was on the website, traffic on 32nd Avenue will increase by 74%. That's a huge number. That's a lot of those kids in that area walk and bike to school. And it's the largest concentration of young school-age kids in this entire region. And you're talking about massively increasing traffic. I don't debate the fact that we need a new bridge. We absolutely do. And there's a great option on the table for Merrifield. What happens, as far as, and Earl, I may be wrong on this. Were there any modeling on what would happen if there was a Merrifield Bridge?
Yes, that was previously done.
Okay.
So as we sequence back, we have this study, we have the hydraulic study, and then prior to that, we have the Metropolitan Transportation Plan
Okay. So
that identified
that does go back.
the other sites.
Yeah, and I thought that I had seen something. Oh, that's what it is.
And so we're forecasting that with Merrifield, it does not attract enough traffic
That's
that
right.
wants to be between both cities
Yep.
to be a relief.
So again, I'm gonna refer back to that Appendix B, which is in the report here. This bridge creates a lot of problems. Creates immediate problems. The Technical Advisory Committee has asked a lot of questions. I don't know if you guys read those notes, but they've recognized that, and that Appendix B really shows it. That on 32nd Avenue, 24th Avenue, Bigland, and Reinhardt are drastic, negative, immediate effects. They immediately go red as soon as you open that bridge. So I guess my question is, why on earth would we spend $35–40 million plus to create additional problems? That will happen. And another thing that makes this project, I think, divisive is it pits city against city. Because East Grand Forks has a strong want for this because it benefits them greatly. There is no skin in the game. You don't have neighborhoods being negatively affected. Grand Forks does. Traffic congestion, like they've just said, is all on the Grand Forks side. That's why you see a lot of people, especially on the south end, it'll dramatically change the traffic patterns on the entire south side of Grand Forks. Makeup of this committee, I understand that we need to be collaborative, but there's 9,000 people in East Grand Forks. Just shy of 60,000 people in Grand Forks. In the last 40 years, East Grand Forks has grown 7%. So it's relative. Look it up.
Yeah.
It's census data.
Continue.
Grand Forks has grown 35% in the last 40 years. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what it's going to look like in the future, but I think it's safe to assume that those trends will probably continue on a similar path at least. I'm going to go back to a comment that I made the very first meeting of this. The purpose of government is to provide benefits to all. And I really look at this as akin to the medical, first, do no harm. And an inner-city bridge in these two locations does a lot of harm to a lot of people. And getting to Target 3 minutes faster for people in East Grand Forks, I don't think that, I don't see that as worth it. That's all I've got. I just wanted to get those comments in.
Sharon, thank you. And I'd be interested in other comments from the group or responses. I was going to add two things in terms of those changes in traffic. What we tried to do in the study was be transparent about that, where traffic would increase, which is why you see those long tables, and we use that coloring to kind of highlight it. So when you say that goes red, that's what that is for. I just wanted to make the distinction between increase in traffic, which we know as a neighbor, resident, parent, like that's what we care about, versus sort of how the street was designed and what amount of traffic was designed for, which is more of our traffic operations analysis, which did not show red, if you will. It showed all the streets operating as they were designed for. So it's not to take away from your concern about the change in traffic, but I think it is important to see it as both of those things at the same time. It's an increase, but it's not an increase that's outside of from that traffic engineering perspective. I think I had one other point, but I'll leave it. Well, I guess I do remember your comment about above all, do no harm. And I guess my sort of twist on that would be when you do a project like this, not everyone receives the same benefits. So it's a little bit more, certainly the goal is not to do harm, but the evaluation process is to weigh costs and benefits at a sort of regional level or at a citywide civic level. So that's not me providing an answer for what to do next, but I think it's unfortunately with projects like these, it is usually not that simple, in that it's not the benefits aren't the same. So again, in the study, we did try to look at where traffic was heavy today and where there would be relief from the bridge, as well as where there was less today, that you would see the increase. So anyway.
And Tim, I want to commend you and your group for providing that data, because it was a big lift. There was a lot of stuff that went into it, and I've been fascinated by the process. I haven't been a part of something like this before. It's very interesting. There's an awful lot of stuff that goes into it that I'll call us regular citizens don't get to be involved in very often, or I shouldn't say that. Many people choose not to be involved because it's pretty esoteric out there stuff that we're not used to seeing. But I'm happy that I've been able to be a part of this. I've been fascinated by it, and there's a lot of tools out there that I think a lot of people are more well versed on than they previously had been. So my hat's off to you. I think you guys have done a good job, Tim.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you've been paying attention, which was your job. I did want to make one other point, which I know we've talked about before, in terms of the do nothing option, and just the fact that traffic will increase regardless. And so for those concerns around schools in particular, I think that issue has registered as a concern today with today's traffic, and without building a new bridge, it will continue to increase. So I would certainly recommend that those issues and locations sort of stay at the forefront to be addressed, understanding that while more traffic would exacerbate those issues potentially, it's not like it's an on-off switch only if you build a new bridge. Other questions, comments, or reaction to any of Eric's points?
Yeah, just a few comments, I guess, to kind of rebuttal here to Eric, and I certainly respect your right to have your opinion.
Absolutely.
As you do.
This is always meant to be a discussion.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a right answer. to
Yep,
this.
and I fully understand where you're coming from the neighborhood where you live. As you might expect, I have different
Absolutely.
different comments coming from a different side of the river, of course. But I would just like to address a few of the things that you said. I don't believe that we have a city versus city, state versus state rivalry kind of brewing here among this bridge. I do believe that it's a local neighborhood versus a greater community difference of opinion. As the impacts of the Build No Bridge and the traffic are really felt up and down the Washington corridor, not necessarily in your residential neighborhood. I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that there's Grand Forks residents who are not in favor of the bridge. So I think that there are, because if you look at the data, the greater community is going to see the net benefits of the 32nd Avenue Bridge. Of course, your neighborhood would accept and receive most of the negative impacts as that bridge cuts right through a residential neighborhood and right past schools. No one's arguing that. But I think that that's important to really focus on so that we don't create this kind of divisiveness between our two communities, because we've done a good job of looking at this as a whole, and the bridge does have a net benefit to East Grand Forks. I mean, that's very obvious. But the negative aspect, I think, is really hyper-focused into your neighborhood. And unfortunately, the ramifications of not building the bridge are felt throughout Grand Forks, not necessarily where you guys live. And then just to comment on the government's job to do no harm, I think another way to look at this here is if we don't build this bridge and the traffic problems that we believe are going to happen are going to be felt through this greater community that we have here, simply just to appease a local neighborhood who does not want this bridge. I mean, that would be potentially government playing favors to keep the people happy who don't want the bridge in their backyard. But it would benefit everyone in this greater community of 100,000 people or so. So that would just be kind of what I'm bouncing back to you after what I heard.
Sure, yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
Others? Discussion, questions, comments?
I'll say something. Yeah, I mean, as far as that's really well said. I agree with that. I mean, I think when you're talking about, you mentioned the Washington corridor, right? I mean, the other corridor is like basically right where I live, right? And near the school that my boys will go to school. So, when we look at these numbers, like, yes, there might be, building a bridge at 32nd specifically might have harms, if you want to call them that, right, focused in one area, but I mean, we shouldn't be under the illusion that the do nothing option is like the do no harm option, right? Like there are impacts to that choice, and those are going to be concentrated in certain places too. So, when you talk about the school-age children, it's like I've got school-age children that are going to go to that school, and if you're talking about using the same modeling software, right, that predicts more auto traffic in one neighborhood, well, like the do nothing option also had increased auto traffic in another neighborhood with another school. So I think it's important to point that out, right? Like there is like a broader community benefit. There might be like hyper-local neighborhood impacts that are detrimental, and that is also true, I would say, of the do nothing option. So I just don't want us to lose sight of that.
No, that all those are correct.
Yeah, and that's also why, at the previous meetings when, even though it sort of risked getting outside of the initial scope, there seemed to be broad consensus to hey, elected leaders, we need to keep an eye on the traffic mitigation, that's just outside of these areas, right, that are just beyond the bridge. If we're talking about auto traffic specifically, and particularly how they interact with the school zones, right? like, you need to look at that too, because that is a big factor. So, yeah, that's all. Thank you.
One comment I want to make here quick too, on those points too, and the goal here I take into this is identifying that best case scenario, where that location for that new bridge might be, because it's a long-term planning process is what I see out of this. There's multiple improvements needed to be made today at many of these schools for drop-offs, safe routes, and if you have that location identified, whether the funding sources ever come to fruition or not, you can make those improvements along the way, because it's probably a 10-year process to get all those improvements, funding sources, and then that day that bridge does open up, like you said, if you open the gates and then you don't do any of that improvements, the negative effects will just be exacerbated, obviously. But it's a planning process to go through that to kind of take care of some of those more immediate safety concerns that we all have. We've heard that from different neighborhood groups and different school entities that have that concerns, and we all have that concern, no matter what neighborhood you're in. Obviously, the Big Lynn roundabouts in my neighborhood, same safe routes to school, stuff like that. It's having that planning goal in mind to look forward 10, 15 years from now when this may actually, the bridge opens for traffic. Are we prepared for that? And to get prepared for that, we need to identify these other intersections that need improvements first. I guess that's one comment I wanted to make, and that's trying to identify the final location. So, thank you.
And I think that's a key point, and I think it's one of the things that this study did a good job of doing, is highlighting some that I think people didn't realize this could be a problem. And I've made a comment before in this too. If something like this does go forward, these cannot be treated as separate projects. Absolutely not. Because then you get yourself into a situation like that where you open a bridge and then everything is just snarled terribly. So in my mind, this needs to be treated as one. If something goes forward, it needs to be an overarching one big thing where improvements are already in place.
Well, is this the on position? Is it already in the on position? Okay, I'll chime in a little bit.
Sorry, you should asking people to introduce themselves just for the audience, so if you wouldn't mind.
Kyle Cavani representing the Grand Forks City Council. My ward is represented, by the 32nd Street and 32nd Avenue. I feel like I want our community to move forward. Let's just step back. I look at the growth that Fargo has versus the growth that we have, and I feel like a lot of it comes down to what is our leadership doing to push forward? How are we becoming a welcoming community that is going to welcome businesses and people alike, right? And for me, looking at our interchange and that we don't have interstate access through the city, for me, that's just oh my gosh, what kind of message am I saying to people hey, come check out Grand Forks, just exit Thompson and then drive for 8 miles to come visit me, and so I think that same analogy goes for our connectivity between Grand Forks and East Grand Forks, and I think that to see my wife's cousin who lives on the south end of East Grand Forks is a 20-minute drive, and then when the river's frozen, he can ride his snowmobile and be in my house in 3 minutes. And so it's man, this just doesn't make sense. So my issue primarily is at 32nd, I think with the access to the highway, I feel like 32nd is just going to become a commercial, thoroughfare. I just feel like it's just going to be so much traffic. If I think of someone that's going to go to East Grand Forks from anywhere on the highway, they're going to exit 32nd and drive through the neighborhood. And that just, for me, it's too easy. So I've had this conversation with some of you guys before, and it's just, I feel like the Point Bridge replicated at Elks is a connective artery between the two cities, but not something that outside would just say, oh, that's the easiest path to get there. And, you look at Elks and what the dike did, and we've already gotten rid of all but one home there, and the person that lives there is all for an Elks Bridge. So it's like if we're able to divert people from Point and divert people from that school that would normally just cross the bridge, hop on Belmont, and drive south to 32nd anyway, I don't think it's the best solution, and I think that's why it's the better solution. I think the best solution is going to end up causing undue harm disproportionately to one community versus another. Whereas if it's kind of a pain for East Grand Forks, then it's kind of a pain for Grand Forks. And I feel like that's just, to me, it makes a lot of sense. I think it's unfortunate the seismic studies didn't let us pursue 42nd or 62nd. 47th or 62nd. I feel like 62nd would have been amazing if that worked out. I know that's on the edge of both towns, though, maybe it's a little bit further on the edge. But then 47th, I mean, we're going to get an interchange on 47th. It's going to happen. Everything's with the study's going. It's going to happen. It's been a long talk, but this is going to happen this time. So if we could have had a bridge there, yes, there's some communities there, but I think there's only like 4 houses. Now, those 4 houses would probably put pitchforks in my yard for saying this, but like those 4 houses versus all of 32nd Street and the schools, like, I know that option was too expensive, but I think that would have served the purpose better in the long run, looking at the highway and looking at access to I-29. Anyway, so long story is that I'm supportive of Elks. I'm not supportive of 32nd because I just don't think it's enough of a compromise. I think it's too beneficial, and it could do too much harm. And I feel like everybody's got hurt. So that's just thoughts there. I think no matter what, we need to connect the communities. It's crazy that it's a 25-minute drive to see my in-laws, when we're so close. So anyway, that's all.
Who haven't we heard from that would like to chime in? Anyone?
This is Craig Walda. I'm representing the East Grand Forks Bigland neighborhood. I heard everyone's comments and have a lot of the same concerns and comments myself, but I guess the only thing I would just say, since some people have said some recommendations or what they believe is the right option, I'm just simply going to say that from my point of view, I am behind the 32nd option as the best alternative. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thanks, Craig. Anyone else?
John Zavil here. I want either bridge, and I just hope this doesn't stop. That's what I'd prefer. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
No, Earl, we didn't study a tunnel. Was that ever an option? I mean, is that a $100 million option? I mean, if we're... Yeah, maybe. That's all, I guess. There's my last pipe train.
No.
It's delayed.
I think, I appreciate again everybody's time and effort, and also the perspective that you did provide us, and also the feedback that you may have gave to your neighborhood or other constituents along the way. We do ask that you provide us any comments by noon on January 26th. After that date, we're going to finalize the report, post it out for the general public, and we'll see how the 2 communities and the MPO and its state and federal partners proceed on this issue and other issues jointly. And again, just thank you all for the effort and time and expertise you gave us. And thanks Tim and his team for the expertise and assistance and guidance throughout the process.
Yeah, thank you, Earl. It's been a good engagement for us. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I wanted to say one more thing to you all on the committee, which was, if I didn't say it before, but not only appreciate your time, but I think in terms of this model of combining sort of these, if you remember, back to how you got here, we identified sort of what we call seats or potential interests or areas that should be represented. From my perspective, that worked well and it was helpful in including sort of the combination of where you all come from or who you represent from neighborhoods to sort of organizations, business, and then to the councils. So I really appreciate that model and think it's been successful, and it sounds like if the MPO is considering using that on other studies as well. So again, thank you, and I look forward to working with you again.
If there's nothing else, we'll adjourn. And again, enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.